Why we love the Tang Dynasty. Exploring the unique charm of what's seen by many as the greatest imperial dynasty in Chinese history. Episode 4. The power behind the painted face. In this episode, we're introducing ourselves to the women of the Tang Dynasty and learning that it was a society of two halves, how the upper echelons enjoyed a kind of #MeToo moment, one that those below could only observe. I'm Bob Jones, and in this podcast series, we'll be getting to know the Tang Dynasty and attempting to discover how, at its height, it became possibly the most powerful, interconnected, and innovative country in the world, with a rich and influential legacy that survives even to this day. When we look back on the time of the Tang Dynasty, as with any historical era perhaps, it's easy to do so with rose-coloured spectacles. To see a fabulous society, extravagant and achieving, open and exploring. Certainly, it was a time when many of the aspects of what China is today, and how it sees itself in history, came together. A flourishing society, economy, art and science, a great trading nation which had become the envy of the known world. Certainly also, women, at the very top of society at least, played a major role in making this happen. History has perhaps overlooked their place and achievements, but as more and more historical evidence comes to light, we are discovering their significance at this fascinating time, which, after all, was the only occasion in Chinese history there has ever been a female emperor. Let's get a snapshot of what we know, understand a little more about what it was like for women in the Tang Dynasty. History tends to focus on emperors and kings, politicians and generals, battles and strategies. Only more recently has a contemplation of social history and the lives of the ordinary people given us a much richer understanding of how people thought and behaved in times past. It's inevitable then that we know quite a lot about famous figures in the Tang Dynasty, but even so, we can still learn a lot about life in general if we look closely at what we can describe as the Tang headliners. Chinese culture is awash with tales of a woman called Yang Guifei. She is regarded as one of the 4 great beauties of ancient China, known for her astonishing looks and as the concubine of the great Tang Emperor Xuanzong. So beautiful, in fact, that he neglected his imperial duties, bringing the dynasty to the brink of destruction. Poets and playwrights through the ages have adored her too. A Song of Everlasting Sorrow, a narrative poem by famous Tang poet Bai Zhuyi. Rain on the Phoenix Tree, a Yuan dynasty play by Bai Pu. The Palace of Eternal Youth, a play by Hong Sheng, a notable playwright of the Qing dynasty. Much more recently, there have been costume dramas on TV. The Legend of Yang Guifei in 2010, for example, and The Lady of the Dynasty, the 2015 film starring the megastar actress Fan Bingbing. And the most recent, a highly popular 2017 fantasy mystery movie called The Legend of the Demon Cat, directed by one of China's best-known directors, Chen Kai-ge. All these works highlighted her beauty, her intense love for the emperor, and the tragedy of her situation. Basically, she makes a good story. But enough of fiction. What do we actually know about her? Yang Guifei was actually the daughter of a high official, and originally was concubine to Emperor Xuanzong's son. But the 60-year-old emperor found her so alluring that he forced his son to give her up. Due to her influence, it wasn't long before her 3 sisters were admitted into the imperial harem, and her cousin became first minister of the empire. Thanks also to young Guifei, an ambitious young general, An Lushan rose to power, was adopted as her son, and, it's said, became her lover. With such powerful patronage, An Lushan came to control an army of 200,000, power which he soon turned against the emperor. Xuanzong and his court were forced to flee to the south. On the way, the imperial soldiers became angry with Yang and her family, whom they blamed for their humiliation, and executed her. So, a sticky end for young Guifei. But her fame and her fortune, while she was still alive, open an amazing window on the life and role of women in the Tang Dynasty. We know quite a lot about her appearance. She is one of the few women in Chinese history to buck the perceived trend of being skinny and delicate. Far from it. Pictures from the time show the aesthetic during some of the Tang period was for more natural proportions. Remember, this was a period of some 300 years, so tastes within the Tang period would have changed. Remember also, and crucially to our narrative, that fashion and trends tended to come from above. The emperor's tastes in women and their fashion would have trickled down through society. But are we making too much of body type? Archaeologists have unearthed early figurines which suggest there was initially a preference for slender figures. By the middle of the Tang period, the artifacts are more ample. But there is one thing that remains constant: a round face. There's little evidence about the lower half of the body, simply because clothing at the time, albeit daring in terms of uncovered shoulders, wasn't that revealing below the waist. Long floor-length costumes were in. Even so, the Tang Dynasty is sometimes regarded as one of the most daring in Chinese history. Some experts have equated this with freedom for women in society. That's probably arguable. After the Tang Dynasty, women gradually lost their freedom to socialize and even go out. We know from paintings that clothing at the time was bright and colourful, and influenced by the many traditions that came from far and wide and met in the Tang capital Chang'an. It was a two-way street. Tang Dynasty styles influenced neighbouring countries, and those places in turn had an impact on Tang styles. Contemporary pictures also give us a good understanding of makeup. There are many paintings along the lines of "beautiful lady with hairpins," which show the fashion to shave off the eyebrows and repaint them as big inverted leaf-shaped smudges. Also they show how women would pin flowers, shapes and other objects to their hair and around their faces. For example, fish scales, feathers, seashells, gold and silver. The ones on their faces are called huadian. There are many legends as to how huadian came about. You can take your pick as to which is correct. They are all variants of the same theme. The one I like most, because it is one of the least violent, is as follows. It involves the Tang Empress Wu Zetian and tells of how she was so angered by her female advisor, Shangguan Wan that she punished her by having a red dot tattooed onto her forehead. In order to hide the mark, Shangguan Wan painted flower patterns onto it, which then became highly fashionable. The more violent version has Wu Zetian hurling a little knife at this female official's forehead, causing a wound. Clearly, Tang courts were far from dull. As well as causing facial damage, the Empress Wu Zetian was also a major influencer when it came to makeup techniques. Historical records speak of her youthful-looking complexion even in her later years. And it was all down to what she called fairy dust. And she left strict instructions on its preparation. First, pick Chinese motherwort on the 5th day of the 5th lunar month and let it dry in the sun. Pound flour and herbs into a powder and mix with water. Form them into little pills, which you then burn. Grind the pills into powder again and add the dried bodies of female scale insects. Use the powder 3 times a day. She also used to smear her face with a mixture of lard, Chinese herbs, roots, yams, magnolia flowers, cautioning to remember to rinse off after 10 minutes. Reportedly, she also regularly ate protein-rich foods, seafoods and flower jam, and was ahead of the game in aromatherapy, which she claimed helped her think. If only YouTube had been around at the time, she was clearly made for social media fame. But of course, people like Wu Zetian and Yang Guifei are at the top of the tree. They wore fine clothes and fancy makeup, and clearly had a lot of power and influence at court. It was quite different, though, at the other end of society. Sadly, though, this is where history lets us down. We need to look for further clues, and they are there if you look hard. For example, we know that Yang Guifei's sister would sometimes travel with a large group of servants and maids. Like carrion crows and magpies, poor women would run after them, hoping to pick up beads and hairpins that had been dropped so they could sell them for food. The gap between rich and poor was immense. One Tang Dynasty poem by the poet Wang Fangzhi describes a poor couple in clothes that are too ragged to be mended. So it's clear that the status of women in Tang society is a bit of a curate's egg. In parts, it was fabulous, and in other parts, it could be a bad place to be. In our next episode, we'll be looking at one of the better parts of the egg: marriage and divorce. Special thanks go out to Sanlian Zhongdu for their help in creating the content for this show. This is Bob Jones. Thanks for listening. Join me again next time.